Okay, folks. So this morning's session, obviously the last one we have before we take a bit of a break over the Christmas period. Um, this is a slightly different session in that I'm going to shoehorn three topics into it, but they're three quite short and I hope quite straightforward topics for you. Um, I It would be wrong of me to say that these topics don't come up in your coursework, but it would be fair for me to say that they are fairly rare in how often that happens. So I'm not saying they're not important. They could come up. Particularly traffic management has come up as a standalone question, but they don't tend to appear as frequently as some of the other topics we've been talking about recently, like risk, like asbestos, like accidents, and so on. So we don't have to delve too deeply into this area. Um, Also, just in particular for this group of you, obviously, unfortunately, with the way we are with online, you don't get the opportunity to network and get to know each other too much. But I know all of your backgrounds. I've spoken to most of you and know a little bit about you, and I know we have a good usual mix. We have people who are site based who will be dealing with things like traffic management and welfare on site as a routine part of what they do. But also there are a good number of you in this group who are either on the client side, consultancy side, design side, and so on. They may not be areas that you normally get involved in as closely. So just to sort of make it clear at the start, we don't have to delve into a huge level of detail on this, but even if you're not site-based, these are all areas that putting your CDM regulations responsibilities hat on, whether you're a client, designer, consultant, or whatever, making sure that a lot of these sort of things happen on site are still part of everybody's responsibility. And just when I mentioned CDM regulations, that will be your final health and safety lecture. The first one back in January will be on the CDM regs. So those are the topics that I'm going to go through this morning. I'm going to start with site traffic. Thinking all the way back to the health and safety overview, one of the things that I drew your attention to was, the statistics, the facts and figures that are freely available on the HSE website, just about where fatalities occur, where accidents occur, and so on. And obviously, health and safety across the board is important, but naturally, we want to concentrate on the highest risk areas. That's where we're going to do most good, with potentially the least resources. So you'll hopefully recall that working at height is consistently the biggest killer, but not far behind that is people being struck by vehicles, plant, and machinery. So, you think about it, construction sites change even on a daily basis. Where things were yesterday may not be where they are tomorrow. Plant and machinery moves around the place. We don't design the temporary roads, the temporary routes and things, for a lifetime's use in the same way as we do the end product. We squeeze stuff in where we can. We make the best use of space that we've got. We have people operating machinery. We have people making deliveries. And again, even, this can happen on the smallest of sites. We've got, people double parking. We've got people, in a hurry trying to get materials offloaded, trying to find somewhere to set stuff off on site and get on their way again. That is why we have the number of fatalities that we do from people being struck by vehicles. Never mind, the lesser injuries that maybe don't make their way into the headlines and the accident figures and so on. But there are probably hundreds of preventable accidents and injuries that happen each year due to vehicles, plant, and machinery. And the sort of people that are affected by that, it doesn't discriminate. You are just as likely to be struck on site, if you're at the groundwork stage as you are when the building's been fitted out, and everybody's at risk: site management, site workers, visitors to the site, and the public. And I just want to highlight that particularly at this stage. There's been research done over the years about accidents and the types of profession of people that accidents happen to. I remember seeing a slide a number of years ago, something that might surprise you, in terms of in the construction industry, people that they categorize as technical or managerial actually proportionately sit higher up on the list of being impacted by accidents than some other trades. And part of the reason behind that is those of us that just visit sites from time to time, we are not as familiar with what's going on. We aren't as familiar of the layout and what types of things might be happening. So just bear that in mind if you're an occasional visitor to site. All of the statistics show that you're more likely to have an accident, either if you are an infrequent visitor to a site or within 24 hours of you starting on a new site. So again, if we think about the importance of things like inductions, where people come in and it's a Monday morning and we've got lots on and we need to get people inducted and we're all a bit busy and we maybe skate over things a little bit and just can you get on with your work there. When people are trying to find their way around the site for the first time, that is one of the times when they're most at risk. So this is not just something that affects people working outdoors all the time, labourers, bricklayers and things like that. It impacts on anybody on the site. And of course, there has to be an interaction between the site and the general public, the access roads, the footpaths nearby, and that again is a very hazardous interaction, because as we know, the public are not subject to the rules that our sites are. They aren't subject to the inductions and the information sharing and so on. And we really have to, assume that they're going to ignore signage. They're not going to be paying attention and so on. And we have a legal obligation as well as a moral duty to protect members of the public as well. And when we look back at those accidents, particularly those that are caused as a result of vehicles on site, we remember a couple of sessions ago we had the accident investigation and how we shouldn't jump to conclusions about accidents. And when we sit down and do that properly, we often find that actually it's poor planning and control is the root cause of most vehicle accidents. So whether you're on the design side, whether you're on the site management side, the earlier that you give consideration to how much site traffic there's going to be, how we're going to manage that, how we're going to move things around, the better chance you have of managing it. Now, I mentioned that it's less likely to come up as a question. I'm not giving you a 100% guarantee there, but what I will say is that some years our project scenario has been a city centre type project where we've had very confined sites and things like that. That's the sort of year I would be more inclined to pre-warn you for a traffic management type question. This year you have you've got a nice big building in the country. It would appear to have a lot of land around it, so you have got a lot of room to play with. You've got a lot of space to do access roads and maybe compounds and storage areas and fabrication areas and so on. So it doesn't rule it out, but it probably makes it less likely than if we had a city centre type environment. So that's just a little bit of the background in terms of why site traffic is such an issue. Let's talk about some ways then some things that we should ensure that happen to make sure that we minimize the risk of those accidents from happening. Segregation is going to be one of the most important things that you look for if it is possible on your site. The more we can keep people away from the machinery and the vehicles, the less chance there is of being an accident. So most accidents, transport accidents on site, result from there being inadequate separation between people and the vehicles. And again, you can see how that comes back to the design stage and being realistic about where people are going to be walking, what are our routes throughout the site, where are people going to be walking from canteens and site offices and fabrication areas and storage areas and toilets, welfare facilities, where are vehicles going to be going, and how much can we reasonably segregate those two, and how do we segregate them? Now, again, you know, it's nice and easy for me to sit here today and show you nice pictures and drawings of big sites. You've lots of room. I recognize that many of you will have been involved in jobs that are absolute nightmares, and you know, maybe you've got a tiny space to work in and lots of work going on. The bottom line is you do the best you can, but what you can't do is ignore it. So in terms of segregation, you know, we start by looking for what is the best that we can do. Are there sections of the site where we can physically segregate pedestrian routes and vehicle routes? Exactly the same way as you would approach, you know, a road layout in a housing estate or a town centre or whatever. You know, we have rules, we have areas that you know, we have a footpath and we have a road and we have crossings and we have signage, and we provide as much information for people as possible. So we're looking for segregation. Ideally, that segregation, you know, is some sort of barrier. We're not talking about just a little bit of multicolored tape here and there. We invest in some sort of suitable fencing or barriers. Just some photographs of good practice that you can see. And again, not every site is going to justify the expense of this. I get that, I understand that, but you know, you've got to weigh it up. You've got to do a risk assessment effectively to decide how in depth you need to go on any particular site. So here is obviously a large site that is going to be up for a considerable period of time, and there is a lot of people moving around the site, but there's also a lot of site traffic. So they have invested using robust physical measures, as we have here: timber box, proper handles, ballast traffic barriers, use a bit of scaffold guardrails and so on in places as well. Have to remember about the entrances and exits as well. So again, the diagram shows a nice big site. This is off the, if you go to the HSE guidance about you know, site traffic, if you have a big site like this and the resources justify it, one of the key things here, whether it's a big site or a small site, one of the most dangerous areas is if your vehicle entry and your pedestrian entry are one and the same. Okay, so now this is fancy and got barriers and signs and hoardings and a site cabin, a security office and so on. Even if you don't have that, even if you can have a pedestrian gate and a gate for site traffic to go in and out, you know, it's not hard to put a separate exit for people to go in and out. You're separating the entry point for pedestrians and vehicles. So whether, as I say, it's something fancy like that, or whether it's just a single pedestrian gate somewhere else on the site that exits onto the footpath, that will help. In terms of where you're asking pedestrians to actually travel across the site, it's a relatively minor type of injury, but it's also one of the most frequently entered in the accident book type of injury, and that is our slips trips. Okay, so you know, construction sites are uneven. We're digging stuff up, we're moving stuff around, we're storing materials, but as much as we can, we want to try and provide firm, well-drained pedestrian walkways that give you as direct a route as possible between the different work areas. So, you know, there's different formats of that. Now, this is not what the law says, but this is one particular large UK contractor, you know, who have their own rules. So, for example, if it's a walkway that's going to be in place for less than 8 weeks, you know, they'll do a walkway, say, with compacted fill, and they'll have a width of about 1.2 meters. If it was going to be in place for a longer period of time, so more than 8 weeks, they would generally put some sort of temporary concrete or tarmac down, nice and evenly formed, and again, at least with a width of 1.2 meters. So again, I'll emphasize, if you've got the budget and you've got the space to do this, that's what you're looking at. It's not a case of you have to do this on every project. I will say that doing stuff like this has more benefits than simply segregating people and pedestrians and providing a level surface for them to walk on. We all make a judgment the moment we walk onto a new site, as in, does this look a professional site or does it not look a professional site? And unfortunately, we also partially adapt our behaviour to what we see. So if we see a slightly lax, more laid back type of construction site, chances are we become more lax and laid back ourselves. If we walk onto a site that's clearly organised, there's good precautions in place. They've done a bit of investment. It makes you feel like, right, okay, they're taking things seriously here. I need to do that as well. So there's a psychological element to doing all of this as well. And another link that I've made frequently in the course so far, there is a link to quality. Okay, so people, you're a group of subcontractors arriving on the site for the first time. You see something that looks the part. You see something that's had some investment in it, and straight away you're going, this is a site that will expect me to be doing my best. This is a site that will expect me to be doing a high quality job. So there's more of a knock on than simply the immediate that you might see. Whatever materials we use, whatever we use for segregating people, obviously in a case like this where it's more there's materials either side, you might get away with, as I've done here, proprietary tubes and some mesh. If that had been closer to an area where vehicles were going, you might have needed something more substantial like temporary concrete bollards or timber box or something like that. So you've got to look at different walkways from different perspectives. Shouldn't forget, particularly in large buildings, about indoors as well. Okay, particularly you think now not so much our wedding venue project, but multi-story buildings as we go, we tend to end up using the multi-story areas as we build for storage, for fabrication, and so on. And again, this is what I mean about a construction site can change from one day to the other. So again, we need to give some thought to our evolving plans as to where our walkways are, what we're going to do to protect them, how we're going to actually mark that. A company that I know well and used to do some work for, they were converting an old, very large old bakery premises into apartments a number of years ago, and they had a very unfortunate fatality with a telescopic handler reversing in a basement area similar to this. That was sort of been used as a part store, part fabrication, and unfortunately the driver didn't see somebody behind him, and there was no walkways, there was no segregation, there was poor lighting and so on, and unfortunately the company learned a lesson in a very difficult way. Talk about sites changing and things evolving and so on. Sometimes we need access routes temporarily to areas, so we might have to deviate off to access areas that we're doing work in. We're maybe doing drainage work, we're maybe doing connections and things like that. So it's not just about getting people safely across the site on the level. We sometimes have to get people up and down safely. So whether we have some sort of temporary ladders and temporary staircases, steps taking us up and down as well. So no point doing 90% of the walkway and to perfection and leaving the last few meters to go for you to have to climb over something or drop down to something. You need to get people all the way safely to where they're going to be working. Even on the largest site, you're going to have points where the pedestrian and the vehicular are going to cross over each other. They're going to interact. So plan your crossings. Think where people are going to be crossing over traffic areas, and put clear signage up. Again, going back to the fatality I've just told you about, lighting played a big issue in that whether it's the pedestrian seeing the machine or the operator of the machine seeing the pedestrian, understanding where the two are likely to interact. And again, the simple things, visibility, not just the lighting, but our high vis clothing. It's called high visibility for a reason. Okay, it's to give people a chance to see you. So again, the temptation of, do I need to throw this on, or if I'm just spending a short period of time on the site, it's there for a reason. Also, and this is something you come across just in everyday life, sometimes any of you who are out on a bicycle or pushing a trolley or pushing a pram, I'm sure you've come across situations where there's an obstruction on the footpath and you've had to divert out round. There's a new housing development pushing on just a couple of 100 yards up the road from me at the minute, and when I go out for a walk sometimes, recently they've been digging up the footpaths to put the various services in, and they're diverting you out onto the roads. And I have to say, fair play to them. They've done it very well. They've put temporary traffic lights in. They've put crash barriers up to divert, even though it's quite a quiet road, to divert pedestrians out into a safe area. We will get situations where walkways are obstructed. So we need to be keeping an eye on that to try and make sure that ideally they're not obstructed, because that forces people to go out of the safe area. So you might have a situation, where you've got a large site like this, where you have, barriers, and a point there you can see coming out from the right-hand side would be the site office, and there's a barrier to physically that will remain down as long as people are walking back and forward there. There's little speed ramps there to remind people that you're going over an area where pedestrians are walking as well, and there's plenty of signage and speed limits and so on. So whatever way that you do it, it should be well thought out, plenty of signage and plenty of warning for people. Also, maybe sometimes there is temporary works going on the site, things I said about how a site can change so quickly. So perhaps even there'll be things like piling rigs moving around a site, and in that sort of situation, people are lazy, people look for shortcuts. Sometimes we have to physically put barriers up to stop them from coming into the danger area. It could be piling operations, it could be excavations, it could be lifting operations. But whenever we've got dangerous activities like that taking place, again, we need to warn people via signage, and we potentially need to put physical barriers to actually stop people from going. Those of you that have viewed the accidents webinar that I did, if you remember the little example of the forklift, we put signs up and we say to people, don't walk here, but people ignore signs. Let's be honest. Sometimes we have to put physical barriers. So again, that's why sometimes in a warehouse type environment where you have forklift operating, you'll recommend that you actually put in some sort of physical barriers that will separate the pedestrians from the machinery that's working there. So again, temporary freestanding fencing like we have there is not expensive and very, very easily moved around the sites. Another one sometimes where we need barriers, many of you be familiar if you've ever had excavation or large plant moving around on site where you've got live high voltage overhead cables. Okay, so what you will do in those situations, you will limit the areas where those vehicles can pass under the cables. You'll put barriers, whether they're barrels filled with concrete, whether you just actually use some of the excavated spoil on the site to create barriers, but you have designated points that machinery can pass safely under the height of the goalposts to move from one part of the site to another. We did actually have a project scenario a couple of years ago, which was a new housing development, and they put into it high voltage cables running right across the corner of the site. And of course, we did a risk assessment and method statement on that. Now, I've signposted for you here quite a bit of guidance. I don't intend to go through this point by point. It's not necessary because it's very straightforward to read and understand yourselves. But HSE provides some really good guidance about site traffic, site transport, and the rules and so on. And you can see there, in this particular one, it talks about different types of sites. So what if you've got contaminated land or a muddy site? What if you've got restricted visibility? What if you've got temporary structures like LPG storage areas or overhead cables? What if you've got a site which has roadways that are close to excavations or pits or watercourses and so on, and it tells you what the control measure is. So if you had a situation where you had any of these, there is some very good guidance, or indeed if you had an assignment question that asked you to deal with some of these situations, there are some of the control measures that you consider. So for example, the last one there, it talks about what if your machinery, your vehicles on site have to pass close to excavations, and many of you will have seen this on site. There are different things that we can do, physical barriers, for example, that we can erect that prevent the vehicles from getting too close to it. And again, over the years, I've seen a number of nasty cases where plant and machinery has slid down into the excavations. Again, when I was in consultancy a number of years ago, there was a fatality on a project involving a dumper that slid down into a deep excavation. And again, it's easy to learn the lessons afterwards. It's better that you think about these things in your planning. Now, here's another piece of guidance. Again, I'll also pop all of these in Moodle, but hopefully you can see them all on the slides anyway. So in terms of ensuring safe site traffic routes, and it gives you some suggestions to think about both for vehicles and also for pedestrians at different areas. And these are all areas that you have to consider when you're planning a site setup. So obviously there's the entrance and exit, that's very important. There's parking areas, okay, so let's not forget in this day and age, everybody, or most people, travel to site in a car or a van. There's a limited amount of sharing and so on, but ironically COVID has kind of almost made that worse, and that some of the guidance we give to people is don't share vehicles, come to site on your own if at all possible. So we have to think about, have we provided adequate parking areas? And there's no point putting our head in the sand over that. If we just kind of ignore it and tell people to go and park where they can and not really worry too much about what happens outside the confines of the site, then we're going to have complaints, we're going to have people double parking, we're going to have difficulty potentially getting deliveries in. So we do need to consider what levels of parking, where might that parking be, whether it's for the people that are working on the site, or indeed whether it's for people waiting to offload and deliver. We're going to need an area for our offices and our welfare facilities, and people are going to be then obviously walking between those and the site area. We're going to need to consider maybe where our primary traffic routes are, bringing materials and machinery around the site. There might be secondary routes that are used less often. We might have storage areas and loading and unloading areas, and we might need areas where we actually do maintenance and cleaning on our vehicles, so even things like wheel washes and things like that. Another big one when it comes to the vehicles on site, I mentioned about the fatality with the telehandler, and it was reversing. Increasingly now, if you buy a new car, you might have a reversing camera on it. We should be seeing the same things on plant and machinery, because reversing is our most dangerous operation. Okay, you have very poor visibility whenever you have reversing. So yes, great if we can put a camera in our reversing vehicles. I mean, you think of the cost of some construction plant. We happily go out and spend £50,000 on a piece of construction plant, and we wouldn't spend £100 putting a little camera on the back of it that might save somebody's life. Okay, so there are things, warning beacons and so on, and sirens and things whenever you're reversing, that can be useful. But also, let's try and cut it out. Let's try and have the minimum amount of reversing that we can on a site layout. So if you can have one-way systems that reduce the risk for people, particularly in storage areas or fabrication areas, if you can have a one-way system or a turning circle so that lorries come in, they have a clear protected space to do a turn and come out in a different direction. And again, there's a little bit of a guide from the HSE documentation about the hierarchy of control for reversing, and it starts, as does all of the hierarchies for safety, with, can you eliminate it? Is it possible to have a one-way system, which means people won't have to reverse it? If you do have to have it, well then how can we reduce it? How can we limit the number of movements? Even just telling drivers not to reverse unless they absolutely have to. If that isn't an option, can we segregate people and vehicles? So if a lorry does have to reverse, is it in an area where there will be no pedestrians? And then we get into our safe system work, as I talked about, reversing cameras and mirrors and things like that. And in all of this, again, signage comes in as well. So good guidance from HSE there. Another one there, which is just some general problems that we have on sites where we can't get good separation between vehicles and pedestrians, where we're going to have reversing, where we have restricted visibility, where we have edges and steep gradients and maybe excavations, where we have obstructions and so on. And it tells you how to avoid those and what sort of control measures you could potentially introduce. So if you have a live site that has any of these issues, that's a really good bit of guidance for you. And if you had an assignment question that asked you to address some of these, there's no better guidance to take than that issued by the health and safety executive. So I touched on parking and things like that. If you're thinking about minimizing vehicle movements on site, is it possible to provide car and van parking for both the workforce and visitors safely somewhere away from the work area? Is there some sort of controlled entry to the work area? Can anybody just drive into the site and park and wander over to the site office, or is there some sort of barrier to go through? Again, this depends on the size of your project, and not every project is going to justify somebody standing on the gate all day. We have to be realistic. Cost does come into this, but if you haven't got that, what way are you going to operate it? And also, whenever you're doing your site layout, this is what I mean about sitting down and thinking about it before you start the job. Where are your delivery areas going to be? Where are your storage areas going to be? That minimise the distances that the vehicles have to go. In terms of the human side of things and the impact that people can have, we can have all the best precautions in the world and signage and segregated areas and so on, but ultimately, as we know as well, a lot of accidents are down to human behaviour. So in terms of the people that you have on site, we always have to be very, very careful when we have people operating plant and machinery, when we recruit them, when we do an induction for them. Have they got the competency that they're meant to? Are all of their certificates and so on and their licenses up to date? Do we give the right training and refresher training to drivers and operators? Do we set any sort of standards for visiting drivers, so people who are just dropping stuff off and so on? The same on large busy sites with signallers. We can all wave our hands and guide somebody in somewhere, but there are recognised signals that you give for different things, and people who do that, as well as the drivers, should be trained on what exactly those signals actually are. And there is a temptation sometimes. In younger days, I've done it myself, even though maybe you didn't have the right competency or certification. It's just a 5-minute job. Would somebody jump on the dumper there? Would somebody jump onto the telehandler there and just shift that for us, or move it out of the way? People who are untrained or inexperienced shouldn't be operating vehicles or machinery on site, full stop. And also, the access we give, so taking the keys out of vehicles, locking vehicles up whenever they're not actually in use. Visibility we've touched on earlier. Okay, so just to emphasize a few points there's the basics like the clothing, so enforcing that everybody's wearing the right high-vis clothing, making sure that our machinery and vehicles have the right equipment, so mirrors, the cameras, reversing alarms and so on, making sure that if we have plant and vehicle marshals, that they have been properly trained and they know what we're doing. And lighting comes into as well, so good temporary lighting. This time of year obviously is one of the worst times of year in terms of how much good daylight we get on site. And it is worth the investment in some good lighting to make sure that everybody can see what they're doing and everybody can see what's going on around them. In terms of passing information to people, we should have site rules, traffic rules as well. That should be clearly up, both in terms of people made aware at induction, and also in terms of signage. And signage should be installed at mirrors or road signage. All of us who drive should understand standard, whether there are no entry signs or speed limits and things like that. So we should use similar types of signage so it's easily understood by everybody. So just to tail that little bit off, folks, in terms of, there's obviously, I've talked there about the dangers of traffic and so on. Generally, how that would translate into an assignment question for you would be to actually get you to produce some sort of site layout and a traffic management plan. You don't have to be proficient in CAD or something like that. Okay, it's perfectly acceptable to print off an A3 or an A4 copy of the site plans, mark it up yourself using good old-fashioned coloured pen and ruler and so on, and then scan it and upload it as your answer. But if you have a little bit of software or you're familiar with marking up site layouts, then that obviously won't do you any harm either. So that's the type of thing that we've seen in terms of questions asking you to produce a site layout. Obviously, the one I have on the screen for a housing scheme, showing phases and so on as well. Last year, as I mentioned to you, we had a very tight city centre site, which obviously presented more difficulties. We had to sort of be creative and use the basement for storage. Once the basement was constructed, we had to even put the site accommodation and so on in that as well. But if you do get this year, you've got plenty of information there, and you've got plenty of room to work on. And as hopefully you're getting the gist of now, you can make whatever assumptions that you wish in terms of, it doesn't actually tell us where the site is and how close to main roads it is and stuff like that, and whether there's good public transport and parking facilities. You make those assumptions that suit you the best. So that would be my guess. If there was a question around this next June for you, it would be to ask you to produce some sort of drawing. If it's a topic that you're good at, drawings can be quite useful because it kind of removes the need for you to have to do 2,000 words. I would always suggest, even if you're submitting a drawing, that you put some form of text along with it. Your methodology, some form of explanation as to why you put stuff where you did. But it does mean that you wouldn't be looking at a 2,000 word question. Okay, so that's traffic and site layouts. A couple of shorter ones just to finish us off then on this. Health and safety management systems. Truth time here, folks, this has never come up as a question. Okay, doesn't mean it won't, but in 10 years since they rejigged the course last, health and safety management systems has never directly come up as a question. However, I do not want to be sitting in June and an element of it does, and you go, Roger, you didn't even mention that during the course. So just very briefly to give you an overview, and hopefully maybe just to get you thinking a little bit about how health and safety management systems might work with yourself and how you operate them. Health and safety management systems are a framework that can give you some confidence that you are doing everything that you're supposed to be doing. Now, like, I'm sure most, if not all of you, will be familiar. There's all sorts of management systems out there. We have quality management systems, we have environmental management systems, and we have health and safety management systems. So, for example, it used to be OSAS 18001, it's now called ISO 45001. You might have standards to meet to get on frameworks such as CHAS, which is part of construction line, or Safety Cert, which particularly in Ireland is a recognised health and safety management system. Or indeed, your company might just have, if you like, a big written set of procedures which effectively form your company's health and safety management systems. Or indeed, I imagine most, if not all of you, will have a health and safety policy. Well, that is a major part of any health and safety management system. There are loads of pieces of legislation out there, and the health and safety management system is a way of you and your organization having some confidence that you're actually complying with as much of that legislation as is physically possible. All management systems are generally based around the management thinker called Deming. So Deming's plan, do, check, act cycle. This works well for almost anything in life. And when you think, it makes a lot of sense. Those are the four most important things you have to do. You plan, you do, you check, and you act. So we're about to start a job. We need to plan. Just like we've been talking about, whether it's putting risk assessments together and method statements, whether it's doing a construction phase health and safety plan, whether it's doing a traffic management plan, we plan and try and predict what the hazards are going to be and how we're going to deal with that. Right, it's a plan, then the job starts. So what does the plan say we have to do? The plan says we have to put a fence here, we have to put a sign there, we have to segregate this area. We go out in small steps and do what the plan said we would do. Nothing in life ever goes 100% to plan. So we check it. Okay, that didn't quite work. So what do we need to do? We need to act. We need to take changes to try and improve it. Okay, and that is a continual cycle that you have within plan, do, check, and act. And those are the sort of, again, if you got a relevant question, those are the sort of little diagrams that work very nicely dropped into assignment questions as well. So that happens continuously. Doesn't matter if you're stuck in an office all day or out on site. Whether you realize you're doing that or not, you're all doing that. You're all thinking, what am I going to do today? Right, then you go out and do it. Then you say, I wanted to get all of this done today. I don't think I'm actually going to be able to do all of it today, so I might have to rejig what I'm planning. And you continually do that. You do that with health and safety management systems as well. It's not like what you write on day one of your planning is going to be written in stone for the rest of the job. You've got to be flexible and you've got to adapt to the circumstances. Some of you will have heard me talk about health and safety and sport. Okay, they're quite a good analogy. But if I can compare health and safety management systems to the sporting world as well, all of these bullet points on the screen work whether you're talking about running a sports team or running a health and safety management system. You've got to know the rules. Okay, if it's a football team, you've got to understand what the rules are. If it's a health and safety management system, you've got to understand what legislation you're working to. Then you've got to, like in any team, give responsibilities to different people. Not everybody's doing the same thing. Not everybody's responsibilities for health and safety are the same level. You have some people who do more things than it. Right, Roger, you do the risk assessments. Alex, you'll be our first aider. Dean, you'll be the person who does accident investigations. So we go and train those people to be able to deal with those specific things. And we practice. We do a fire drill. We look at different situations to make sure how we deal with things. The sport team goes and practice different scenarios. In the health and safety world, we try and do emergency drills to see, would this actually work? We put the right people in the right positions. Okay, we look at our team, we say who's strongest and who's best at doing what. We give people the proper training. We need to communicate well so that everybody knows what everybody else is doing. We need to review how things are going. Okay, a sports team, the manager's standing at the side going, this ain't working, I'm going to have to change things, I'm going to have to move things around. The health and safety manager, the site manager, the contracts manager is doing exactly the same thing. I got all that information off those subcontractors, but they're not doing it the way that they're supposed to. We're going to have to pull them back in and have another chat about things. And we have to be able to adapt and make changes where we need to. And in all of this, you keep striving to be better. So you can see the analogy there. Your health and safety management system should work exactly the same way as a sports team. Folks, the door's opening. I'm just going to pause for a second. So I will be back in 60 seconds. You're giving yourself a little bit of false security if you think that the certificate on the wall is enough. You need to actually acknowledge all of those things and say, are we doing it? Unfortunately, as well, a part of it that we can't get away with is management systems require documentation. But the documentation should be as easy to use, user-friendly as possible. It's not about how many forms you can have and how many boxes you can tick and how many pieces of paper that you have in a file somewhere. If your emphasis is on, did you complete that form before you did things, people forget about actually focus on what you're going out to do. The documentation should be the minor part of it, should be the secondary part of it. The focus should be, what is it that I'm actually tackling? What is it that I'm actually going to do today? So absolutely, paperwork, documentation is a necessary evil, but keep it in proportion to the risks that you're actually dealing with. So, again, I'd say with health and safety management systems, it's not just about having the system, it's about how people buy in, again, just like a sports team. Okay, so you can practice and you can train and you can have a whole regime in place, but it's about people's attitude, it's about how people behave, it's about the buy-in, and we talk a lot about safety culture, and that is a key part of a manager's role. Often it's left to a health and safety person to try and implement all of this, but for it to work in any organization, we need buy-in from the management team to make sure that everybody plays their part within a health and safety management system. And the two words, I guess, if you take two words away from, or take two words out from health and safety management systems, the two words you'll hear most is continual improvement. You never get to a point in health and safety where you go, that's it, I've got to where I need to be. And again, my last comparison to a sports team, the team that does well and thinks we're at the top of our game and we don't need to do any more will be very quickly overtaken again. Okay, so you're always looking, it might be small incremental improvements, but you're always looking for something new, in a health and safety management system. Finally then, folks, for this particular webinar, I just want to mention about welfare facilities. Now, I have put a lot of information onto the slide here about welfare facilities. I don't intend or need to go through every slide in detail with you, but just to point out the key areas. And if you either want more information on welfare, the detail is in the slides, or indeed if you got a question on welfare facilities, again, the slides would provide the perfect basis for you. What I will say again is there hasn't really been a question on welfare facilities. It may be something that you could possibly mention as part of another question, but I can't see a scenario where you will get you know, a question 2,000 words just on welfare facilities. You could, if they're being smart, like they have been in November just past, and they tried to be relevant and they asked a COVID related question. You know, they might ask you, you know, how what changes might you make to ensure that the site is COVID compliant. Here's hoping by June. That's not as relevant as it is now, but if you got a question like that, part of it would be your welfare facility. So some of this might come in there. We all have an understanding of what we mean by welfare facilities and the toilets and hot and cold water and changing area, drinking water, and somewhere to eat and take a break. That's all a basic expectation, and it's also required under the CDM regulations, which, as I've said, I'm going to talk about again in January. As we're looking at this all from a management perspective, it's about the planning. It's about not just making sure stuff gets thrown on the site and put together in a haphazard way. It's about, at the early stage, before you've even started on site, what are we going to need? Where are we going to put it? How are we going to maintain it? And make sure that it is all in place from day one. Will there be other considerations, like is there a lot of demolition work on this site? Is there going to be a lot of very dirty work like sewer maintenance? That might mean that we would have to provide shower units, as an example. You know, we can't sort of stick our head in the sand about this. What sort of distances will have to be travelled? I visited a large waste to energy plant outside Edinburgh that a former student of mine was project managing, and you know, huge big site, and one of the things he was pointing out was just the fact that the welfare facilities dotted right throughout the site because of the size of it. You couldn't expect everybody to be you know, walking back to a centralized welfare area all the time. They would spend a good portion of their days traveling around the site. So we have to be realistic about that. We have to be realistic about numbers. Numbers can fluctuate, you know, as I'm sure you've experienced. Coming closer to the end of a project, there's maybe an influx of people, and will our welfare facilities be equipped to deal with that? Who's going to keep the welfare facilities clean and tidy? How are they going to be kept up to scratch? And again, in terms of phasing, sometimes we might have to move, particularly if we've got a tight site where the welfare facilities start. We might have to move them, and how are we going to deal with that? So I have details on each of them. This is what I'm not going to go through slide by slide, but there's information there just about, you know, our rules about toilets, and how many of them, and about them being well ventilated and lit. There's the guidelines on washing facilities and having hot and cold water and towels and soap, and whether you provide male and female or unisex and so on. We need supply of drinking water, ideally direct from the mains, but if not, it can be in containers or bottles, but again, it has to be kept fresh and so on. We have to provide changing areas and lockers, because we have people coming in with, they need a change of clothes. We have PPE and so on, so people need to have somewhere to put that. And again, we have to consider, is there any special requirements where people might be wearing additional protective clothing, so you know, wetsuits and things like that, or even if there's obviously things like asbestos work going on, and they'll have their own decontamination units and so on. We need to be able to dry wet clothing. I know a lot of people sit in their van and take their breaks, but it doesn't excuse us from the requirement to provide rest facilities, somewhere to sit and take a tea break or a lunch break, or to come inside if there's, particularly in inclement weather. And within that area, there should be a way that we can prepare food, so microwave or some sort of way of heating stuff up on a kettle. And I don't know about you, but I walk into many's a site canteen and see stuff stored all over the place. What the guidelines say is that rest areas are rest areas. They're not to double up as storage areas. We also have to recognise that some of you in construction are not working on the same place every day. You're moving around transient facilities, so maybe somebody who's doing maintenance work or short-term projects and so on, roadworks, cable laying and maintenance operator. There are still rules for that. It is acceptable to make arrangements for people to use. So you're in somebody's house doing maintenance work, it's acceptable to make arrangements with the householder to use their facilities, but that has to be clear. You're working in a shopping centre, you're working in an office, you can make arrangements with there. It's not a case of having to provide temporary ones all the time. But as long as there is some sort of arrangement in place, that will be acceptable. So folks, that is traffic, management systems and welfare. That brings us to the end of that session. Apologies for the short interruption in the middle. So have we any questions, anything anybody would like to ask or add, or about the topics or anything that we've been doing the last few weeks?
Just a quick one on the asbestos, Roger. Has the Moodle site been sorted now? Because I still can't get a copy of the video.
Okay, the Moodle site has not been sorted. I got an email last night from Jo Bennett, who's the scheme manager, and she's asked them to look at it again. It had been fixed and it has reverted back for some reason. For those of you that don't know, if you've noticed, Moodle's had an upgrade in the last couple of weeks, and one of the things, it has reset the size of file that we can upload, and it makes this video too large to upload. Hence my email about putting it on YouTube. I know that Wayne had difficulty accessing. Did any of you manage to watch it on YouTube? Did any of you try to watch it on YouTube? I'd just be interested to know. I could watch it, and I notice it has a couple of views, but I don't know if that's me watching it or if any of you successfully. Moodle, the last time they fixed it within 24 hours, so I raised it again after your email, Wayne, just to try and speed that up a little bit. I will share this on YouTube, so you'll see an email going out later today saying this one's up on YouTube as well. But Wayne, I hope that will be imminent. So fingers crossed. And perhaps if any of you who missed the asbestos session, if you follow that link or just go to YouTube and type in training LMS and see if you can see our asbestos video, I'd be interested to know whether it was just Wayne that had an issue there, or whether there's some deeper technical problem. Okay. Thanks, Wayne. So apart from that, folks, again, we'll just repeat what I said at our last session. I see a few more assignments coming in bit by bit. Thanks for that. And I will hopefully get some time over Christmas and certainly the first couple of days in January to look at those. And we are back on the 6th of January. That week, you will start to get emails from me offering you slots for one-to-one reviews of your coursework. If you haven't got your coursework in and you feel you just want a one-to-one just to have a chat about a few things, please just drop me an email. What I do is, if you've submitted a piece of coursework either on Moodle or via email, I will give you an appointment. If you haven't, you need to contact me to ask for one, okay? But that's absolutely no problem. So I'd rather you put in a practice assignment, but if you haven't, don't worry about asking me for an appointment anyway. And those will kind of be around the first full week back in January. I'll be doing those. I obviously cannot guarantee I will be working to the normal over the Christmas period, but if you're working on your coursework and you've got a problem or a question, drop me an email, because I will be picking them up periodically. So if you are working on something or viewing videos over the Christmas period, drop me an email and say, well, I probably won't get back to you straight away, but I will be checking my emails most days anyway. So any other questions before we wrap up, folks?
Yeah, Roger, there was two videos I missed. I think your colleague Walter was doing them.
Yes.
Show me where they are on Moodle. I just couldn't find them.
That's okay. There should be. Walter had the same issue with the size, but I believe he gave a link. So if all of you just don't mind bearing with me for a second, I'll share the screen just for everybody's benefit and that. So in the health and safety, no, it's not in the health and safety resources. It's back to your Moodle homepage and down to health, safety, environmental. These links here, environmental session 1, environmental session 2. If you click on that, that should bring you to, I hope.
See, it wasn't working for me. It was just, oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
That wasn't coming up for me for some reason. It was just kind of giving me the blue wheel of death. I wasn't getting anywhere.
That's okay. Well, Andrew, try it again, and if it doesn't work, come back to me, and what I'll do is I'll just copy it straight into Walter, and I'll maybe try and share it through another file sharing or something like that, or if needs be, we'll put it up on YouTube as well.
Yeah, perfect.
But listen, for all of this, folks, normally everything's on Moodle. It's typical IT upgrade, and it's caused all sorts of problems for CIOB. The video is the only problem it's caused for us, but it's caused all sorts of problems for CIOB with other stuff. So hopefully that will be sorted very, very quickly. Just this morning, I have put some asbestos stuff on Moodle. The video isn't on Moodle, but the presentation is on Moodle and some other documents that might be used for you. So if you look on Moodle, you'll see some stuff under the asbestos folder as well. Okay, so anything else, folks? All good. Well, listen, I hope you all have a great Christmas and Happy New Year and all that sort of stuff. Maybe talk to some of you over that period. If not, the rest of you, look forward to seeing you all again in the new year.
Cheers, Roger. Thank you.
Merry Christmas. Cheers.
Bye now.
Thank you.